Ed. Thank you all for joining us. I see like a really exciting mix of 2020 grads, continuing students, and incoming students, which is what I was hoping for. We have an illustrious panel of LBJ alumni who are either current presidential management fellows or PMF alumni. And I'm really excited to share their experience, for them to share their experience with you, because the PMF program is a very prestigious pathways program into the federal government. And during that 2-year program, you get lots of specialized experience, specialized leadership training, mentorship opportunities. And it's something that I really hope that any LBJ student that's interested in working for the federal government applies for, whether you're eligible this year or if you're just an incoming student, something to think about and maybe factor into your decision making for when you are eligible next year. So I think, let's see, the program I think has been around for over 30 years. But from what I have been told, the application process has changed quite a bit, which is why I'm excited to have some more recent-ish grads from LBJ. So I think without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and have all of our panelists introduce themselves, tell us when you graduated from LBJ, and give us sort of a brief description of what your path has been since LBJ to where you are now. And I'm going to start with the first top left for me, which is Elizabeth.
Hi, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Petrulli. I graduated with a master's in public affairs from LBJ in 2018. And I knew I wanted to go back to Washington, D.C., so I moved there pretty much immediately after graduation. Was a finalist at that point, but I didn't have an offer. So I moved kind of like fingers crossed, hoping it would work out, and it did, but I was fully prepared to make it work in the meantime, which I did end up getting a part-time job. And I currently, the job that I accepted is the job I still have. I work for the Administration for Community Living, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, as a program specialist in the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Next, let's Tasha.
Hi, I'm Tasha Shafe. I'm also a class of 2018 from LBJ with a public affairs degree. So yeah, Elizabeth and I lived together during our summer internships in Washington, D.C. And I went into LBJ knowing that I wanted to work for the federal government. So I did a federal internship at OMB, and PMF was always kind of my top plan. And I applied fall of my second year. When I became a finalist, ended up spending the spring doing a ton of phone and video interviews, and I got a placement at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is a small independent agency. It was a really great experience, but I'm now at GSA, the General Services Administration, which is where I did a 6-month detail during PMF. So that's one of the really awesome things about the program, is that you get to explore outside of the agency that you match with, and it ended up being a great fit for me. I completed PMF a year ago, so I just hit my 3 years with the federal government. And once I completed PMF, GSA was able to transfer me over into a permanent position.
Thanks, Tasha. Next, Rochelle.
Hey everyone, I'm Rochelle Ramey. I am I got my degree in MGPS at the end of 2019, so I did an extra semester. And between then and when I finally had my PMF appointment, I was working at Texas Global, as well as the TCE, Texas Career Engagement, that's what it is, while I was waiting for kind of to hear back from the PMF program to see who would ultimately take me on. So I am currently, I've completed my first year at the CDC. I am a policy and issues management analyst working in the Office of Financial Resources, and I will be starting my 6-month rotation at the DEA soon.
Thanks, Rochelle. Lucas.
Yep, sounds good. Great to see you all. So, like Rochelle, I am 2020 PMF. So I'm currently in the program right now. I just hit about a week ago, 1 year anniversary. Similar to a lot of the others, I always knew I wanted to be in DC. I wanted to work for the federal government. I really didn't know when I got to LBJ sort of what the pathway would be and kind of how to get in there. So during my summer internship between my first and second year in DC, I actually didn't know about the program until just at a networking event when I met with someone from OMB and they told me about the PMF program, and that prompted me to apply. So I applied during my second year at LBJ. So I got notified as a finalist in November 2019. And then I think roughly about 5 months. I think I applied to 30 to 40 different appointments, different jobs. Eventually, I landed at HHS. So I'm in the Office of the Secretary as an economist, in ASPE, which is sort of an internal think tank within HHS. And then now I have just started my rotation at Department of Labor. So I'm a workforce analyst right now in ETA, and I'm excited to talk to you all about the program. Despite it being virtual, it's been a pretty fantastic experience.
And last but certainly not least, Laura.
Great. Hi all, my name is Laura Siegelman, and I graduated from LBJ in 2020 with a dual degree in global policy and energy and earth resources. So I actually didn't necessarily know whether or not I wanted to be working in federal government, but I knew that I wanted to work in climate in some way. And so I did my first internship at UN Environment and my second internship in DC at a think tank, and kind of decided that I wanted to be in international development, but I wanted to be in DC. I didn't think that living abroad was necessarily a lifestyle that I wanted. So I was pretty interested in USAID, and PMF was kind of, it's, if you're interested in a specific agency, it's really the only way as an entry-level person to join the federal workforce. So I'm currently at USAID. I knew that's where I wanted to be, and I applied to so many jobs at USAID. And I am in, my home office is in innovation, technology, and research. And so I've gotten to engage a little bit on climate there, but not entirely. I'm currently on rotation with the Africa Bureau doing climate, conflict, and migration work. So one of the great parts of the PMF program is that you do have all these rotation opportunities to pursue various interests once you are in the program.
Excellent. Again, thank you all for being here, and I'm really excited to hear all about your experience. I know that the PMF application opens pretty soon. I want to say it's September 28th. And don't worry, for all of you current students, we'll be bombarding you with messaging about that. But I want to start with some questions about the application process, what it was like. One, what it was like in the beginning, and then two, as Lucas mentioned, he applied for 30 to 40 jobs, and I saw all of you nodding your head pretty emphatically. So if you want to tell us a little bit about like what that was like and what you did in between getting the final, or being a finalist, and then being placed in a position.
I can start. So there's the application to become a finalist to get into the PMF program, which is, I know they're making some changes to it, but it's an online assessment. There's, resume, kind of transcript, that sort of standard stuff. And then there's a online kind of, there's a written section, there's like a math section, if I'm recalling correctly. And then there's kind of like a personality test type, what would you do in this scenario, multiple choice section. They had a lot of OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, has been doing some listening sessions and focus grouping on revamping the assessment process, but I think most changes that they implement will take place next year, not for this current cycle. So definitely go to their webinars. They're doing a lot more coordinated outreach for how you can get involved and prepare. But once you become a finalist, you have 1 year to actually find a position within the federal government. And so what Lucas said and what we all nodded at is that you really want to cast a wide net and apply to any job that seems mildly interesting to you. And I think that that's really critical, because what I didn't know until I was actually hired is that there are sometimes people who are looking to hire but don't have an open posting. And so I got hired off of what's called a cert list, which means I had applied to, I think it was HUD, and the position, the office that I work for now was looking for someone who had the same types of skills. And so I met the like minimum qualifications list for the position at HUD, and therefore they could hire me off of their list. So that's why, you know, Lauren knew she wanted to be at USAID. I knew I wanted to be in like domestic social policy. So I was applying all over the place. So your strategies may vary depending on where you want to be, but I think it is important to not put all your eggs in one basket as much as possible. And I did take a part-time job between when I left Austin and moved to DC. I worked for an independent educational consultant who helps high school students do their college preparation. So I did a lot of proofreading and editing of Common App essays, and my time at the Baines report came in handy for that. So.
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off of that, you know, the application process is really intense, right? Because you have to get in and then you have to apply again to all these other jobs, right? And so you have one resume to help you become selected as a finalist, but then you should be tailoring your resume to all the individual postings that you apply to. And, you know, I got advice from a peer after I had already applied to probably 30 jobs. I was like, no, you need to slow down and you need to pick and choose better so that you have the time to tailor your resume to those. So while I did apply to a ton of positions, you know, because I knew I wanted to be at USAID, I probably would have been better served if I had, instead of just sent, you know, the same resume along to all of them, pick and chose a couple that I was really interested in and taken the time to mirror the language from that. Because oftentimes the hiring manager is not the person who actually posted it and actually knows the position. They're just looking for those specific terms and phrases, such as project management or statistical analysis and something. So you really need to think critically about, you know, what is it that you're looking for? If you're just looking for something in international affairs, there's a ton of different agencies you can be looking at. You know, all these different agencies that we think of as domestic have international affairs positions. But then you also need to be thinking, okay, do I have the time and energy to invest and get my resume where it needs to be? And that can be a really challenging part of that. I also took the Foreign Service test a few weeks prior to the PMF assessment because I was interested in becoming a Foreign Service officer. And strangely enough, they were quite similar at the time, and I felt that was super helpful. I do know that the entire process is undergoing some serious changes right now. They've seen a significant decline in the diversity of candidates that were selected, and so OPM is revisiting the PMF application process. We don't yet really know what that means, but we do know that there's going to be some tweaks on the assessment and how they're looking at it. Likely not this year, but in future years. So for the assessment, I would say just read up on what materials are out there about it. There's a ton from Georgetown because they just like bring people into the program. But also things that you don't necessarily think of, like the Foreign Service practice tests were super helpful for me.
So I'll add on getting ready to apply that any of the paperwork that you can get ready in advance of that application period opening, you need to be doing that. You're going to need a copy of your transcript, and I'm pretty sure you need something that says you will be graduating by their deadline, because you have to graduate by August of whatever year you're applying. So that's something that's not going to automatically be on your transcript. You might need to reach out to the bursar's office or even get something from the LBJ administration saying that they're on track to graduate. Also, yeah, polishing up your resume in advance. I mean, for me, I just sat myself down in the library for 4 hours to do the assessment, treating it like, you know, a standardized test, basically. And there will be an essay section, and that's essentially your cover letter is what you need to think of it, because that's the only writing that they're going to see from you before they select you. I also want to assuage some of your fears about like the applying for 30 or 40 jobs thing, because when you apply for jobs on like USA Jobs, it's a lot of work. You have to answer all of these questions about KPIs and stuff. And it's like, or KSAs. For most of the PMF applications, it's emailing a person in an office with a copy of your resume. So like tailoring your resume really is the main thing, but you're reaching out to a person. It feels a lot less like the black box that USA Jobs. So, and I will also say that they only accept as many finalists as they have placements for. And in my experience, pretty much everybody who becomes a finalist and chooses to stick with the program is able to find a placement.
Yeah, just quickly touch, like emphasizing Natasha's point. So basically there's a portal of jobs that are specifically designed for PMF. So you're not, maybe like 2 or 3 jobs might be available through like USA Jobs, but generally there's going to be like a TMS system that's going to be that where you're going to submit either a resume or they'll mention a cover letter. It varies by different organization as well as the specific task itself. I feel like even some wanted me to submit a writing sample, but it's pretty uncommon. I think one thing you'll see is that as you kind of cast this wide net, you will, believe it or not, although the first 10 times you apply, you might hear radio silence, you might be getting quite a few offers. And then you're going to kind of get into the point as you're kind of having this myriad of different organizations that might be reaching out to you itself to be able to kind of decide between there what's really right for you. I think it's really, when I got my first offer kind of from my first agency, you kind of want to just like say yes and go, but you really kind of got to take a step back and really look at the organization, look at the mission itself and the actual work that you're going to be doing and see if it's really worthwhile for you. And certain agencies, candidly, some have better representation than others. Some have different sort of things they might do in terms of rotations, what they allow you to do, as well as different developmental assignments. So I think that aspect of itself is really doing the homework on the front end is just as important. And in regards to I think there's a critical reasoning part, like a math section. I want to kind of quell some fears. It's nothing like the GRE or anything like the pre-exam that you have to take for the math. It's, if you like kind of like look back on some of like your IEM or analytical method stuff, then you should be more than fine. That's not something I would worry too much about.
And then I guess to round this out, I have to say, like, if I were you in this position listening to this panel, what I would like to hear from me, I will be completely frank in that when I applied for the PMF program, I had zero confidence that I would actually get in. And I would tell myself, do not be intimidated by the process. Yes, it is a lot. However, you don't have to do it all in one go. Tasa said she did hers in all in one go. I did mine all in one go. But if you start early, you actually can break it up into more manageable pieces. So it's not that 4 hours chunk of time that you have to kind of set aside to get through the process. You can take your time with it. And then the PMF program has an applicant handbook that I think was kind of linked in the chat. That will spell out all the different processes for this assessment and will even tell you kind of the competencies that they test for. And if there's anyone else who did LDP here, competencies just seem to be the thing that they harp on a lot. So really pay attention to those competencies in your assessment. And then I would also like to just like really point out high key, like the benefits of this program if you're kind of on the fence for applying. Like you get hired a lot quicker through this program. It's much more of a streamlined process. You're really only competing against other PMF finalists for these positions. You get so many hours of leadership training. Like I, in my first year, had 200 and you're only required 80. So you definitely a lot of kind of help in those training hour areas. And then you jump 2 GS levels through this program, which if you're not familiar with the GS scale, typically it can take people 8 to 10 years to jump these GS levels, and you're doing it in 2. And that's your pay scale, and it's a lot of money. I hate to like really point out this point, but for some it is kind of something really important for them to look out for. And that's kind of really what sold me to this program, other than me really wanting to work a federal job. And then once you get your foot in the door, it's a lot easier to pivot to other agencies or other offices within your agency. A lot easier. So those are some things you should think about when you're trying to assess whether or not you want to take the PMF application assessment. I highly suggest you do, even if you have questions of whether or not you'll actually get in like I did. And then secondly, to kind of hit on the points for securing a position, not everyone's going to go through the same process. For me, I wasn't one who applied to 30 different jobs. I did apply to a lot, but definitely not that many. And then with my CDC position, it was actually a case where this PMF coordinator within the CDC found my application resume, saw that I wasn't appointed to the position that I applied for, but then asked, hey, are you interested in coming to Atlanta and working at the CDC? I said, yeah. And she actually passed out my resume to all of the offices within the CDC that were looking to hire PMFs. So right there, I had 10 emails coming in asking me for interviews that I didn't apply for. So there are very different ways to go about kind of finding opportunities for home offices. And then definitely emphasizing some of the points that were made earlier. Cast a wide net. As long as something sounds interesting, I say apply for it. I have no public health background. I have no financial background, and yet I'm at the CDC in the Office of Financial Resources. It has nothing to do with my academic experience, but I'm definitely learning a lot. And also just as a point that someone else mentioned, kind of do your homework beforehand. I talked to a lot of PMF alumni to get kind of pick their brains about what the PMF program is like within their agency. And as someone mentioned, it's very different depending on the agency. CDC, we have a really robust program where we never have to worry about training hours. Others, there may be 7 other PMFs that you hardly talk to each other. Some may treat you like interns, some may treat you like full-time employees. Some agencies will give you kind of tuition assistance for your student loans. It just really depends. So try to do your homework beforehand when selecting a potential home position.
Great, thank you all. I guess working backwards from that, I want to hear what you feel like made you competitive in the process to become a finalist, both like during the application process, but also maybe what are some things you did at LBJ that helped make you more competitive?
I can start. I honestly, there's been a couple allusions to the assessment and the process is changing. I felt like I did not do the level of preparation that some people did to take the test. And I kind of figured this will not work out and I will move on to other things. Like I was continuing to apply to jobs in Austin and other places in DC. But once I became a finalist and kind of more seriously thought this is going to happen, the things that came up in my interviews from LBJ that I think were helpful were the policy research project, being able to talk about kind of, that project management. I worked with Dr. Osborne on the AISD pre-K3 assessment and actually like doing in-field data collection and being able to work with a school district, and they were our client and present to them. That was all relevant to my office. The reason that my boss was interested in me, kind of similar to Rochelle, is that she saw my resume on the PMF kind of resume data bank thing. And I had listed that I had been a court-appointed special advocate, and a lot of my interest was towards the child welfare system. It looks like Tasha is back.
Yeah, sorry, my computer crashed.
So I basically everything I had done up to that point was focused on the very early childhood, maternal fetal health, early childhood education, nutrition, and child protection. My office focuses on adult protection. So although it's a different end of the life course, there are some similarities between child protective services and adult protective services, and looking at violence prevention more holistically as opposed to just focusing on one sort of age range. So I think being able to talk about your experience and how it could apply to other fields and areas is really critical. I had a friend who was in a PhD program, and before she got a postdoc, she was thinking about maybe going into more of a corporate track, and being able to kind of crosswalk your academic experience to skills. And you've heard everybody talk about core qualifications and competencies and KSAs, like see what those are in the jobs you're interested in and think about how what you did in school helps you get those things. So I think writing skills are really critical. You get that in a lot of your courses. I also was the editor of the Baines report, and being able to talk about editing people's work was really critical for me. And I had happened to read a book called Being Mortal that's all about aging, and that obviously came up in the Office of Elder Justice. So if you have interests outside of school, that can help too.
Yeah, I can kind of go off the kind of everything Elizabeth said was completely on point. I can talk to a bit on the application to become a finalist. And I think I actually talked to Natasha about this when I was applying to as a finalist. But in regards to when you put together the resume, as we said, you don't get a cover letter. So your resume is essentially, this is what your portfolio is. This is what you've accomplished. Are you meant for this program? And there's going to be these 8 competencies that are in the LDP program that are going to be completely reiterated about flexibility, integrity, written communication skills, flexibility. These I ensure when I was writing my resume, whatever tasks I'd done, whether it was internships, whether it was classes, whether it was actual work, that I was like really emphasizing each of these core competencies and not really kind of underselling myself, which I tended to do honestly before the program about what my actual accomplishments were. And so making sure that there's not really a style guide on what they give you for what the resume that you submit to be. Some people do a federal resume. Mine was more of like a typical 2-pager, but basically your resume is pretty much have it all out there. Any opportunities that you had to show leadership, that you show analytical skills, whatnot. And then similar to the writing assessment, I kind of, empaths don't have the writing class, but I know GPS people do. You have an advantage at LBJ being able to learn kind of how to write like a policy student. And that's really what they're looking for during the writing assessment. You have 30 minutes to write. I forget what they asked us, but it was some public policy question, and basically being able to write like a decision memo and making sure that you're basically showing that you can write. Because I basically, what I have done in my first year, essentially being able to be a good writer gets you really, really far in the amount of tasks that they're going to be able to give you. And then I think this one could be more difficult, I would say, due to the pandemic and the internship opportunities that were really out there. And it's also I want to preface it's kind of a, I'm going to be honest, in my opinion, it's a little bit of a crapshoot because OPM is really not really communicative about how they're really taking whatever you get on the assessment or from your resume. But I think the fact that if you have any federal government experience or just like had any projects that deal with you working with the federal government or analyzing like a federal policy, I think that's something that you should be highlighting either in your resume or in the interviews that you're going to be having with agencies if you get to a finalist. Because one of the questions that I got asked that kind of got me off guard was kind of like, why do you want to work in the federal government? Like, why not state and local? Why not NGO? Why not public sector consulting? And being able to kind of have that in your mind about why you want to work in the federal government for me and be able to have that answer is, I think, really important, because I think they're not really looking for a one size fits all, but they're looking for people that have a deep commitment to public service. And I don't think I can really emphasize that enough, because I think there's 5,000 people that apply to this. And I think if you're able to really touch on those aspects of it, it'll put you at a pretty distinct advantage.
Great, thank you. I'm going to open it up for any audience questions. So while you all are thinking of your questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. Any questions you might have for our panelists. I kind of want to hear all of you give like a 30-second to a 1-minute sort of plug for why students should apply for this program, what you've gained from it, all of that.
I can start off. I think like what folks were saying earlier, this is an incredibly, I think Rochelle was saying it's a really unique opportunity, both because you otherwise really don't have access to these types of entry-level federal positions. It's an incredible experience because of the training opportunities that are open, and also because you will have access to people that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. People know that like what the PMF program is in federal government, and they're willing to take, like high up people are willing to take meetings with you and talk about their jobs and network with you and introduce you to other people. Like I got my rotation just by cold emailing people across the agency. So it's this incredible opportunity that gives you access to training, to people, to opportunities that you really wouldn't have otherwise. And like Rochelle said, the promotion is also really incredible. Like, and if you're a dual degree, you will enter as a GS-11 and higher out as a GS-13, which is absolutely huge in the federal government. Everyone knows who PMFs are, and it's a really great, you can talk about it with people. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredible opportunity, and it's like working at USAID and within PMF has just been really exceptional.
And to pounce off that, I won't repeat everything that I mentioned earlier because I'm sure I went into this a little bit. But the PMF program, especially with rotations, and I'll talk about my experience. My rotation, if you apply normally, takes about a year to get into, and you have to go through various assessments. You have to take different trainings. However, as a PMF, I'm pretty much being dumped right into it. All I needed to do was submit a writing sample, and they're like, yes, we'll take you. So when I say it's a really quick way to get into some of these positions, I'm not exaggerating. Once they hear you're a PMF and they know they're taking PMFs on, they know they're getting like a high quality person into these positions. So for me, with my rotation into DEA, I'm skipping year plus amount of vetting before getting this position. And then for me, I didn't come from a background with a lot of federal experience. I did have 2 internships while at LBJ, both with state. One, I was a summer intern at Consulate Wuhan in the summer of 2019. So before all of this kind of fell into our laps pandemic wise. But I was also a VSFS intern, so the virtual student federal service intern for about a year. And I did a lot of research during that time, which I think also helped me to kind of get to the areas that I am within the PMF program. But definitely those types of experiences will help you within the PMF and can take you further than you probably could even imagine within this program.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just add, if you have even a little bit of interest in working for the federal government, this is the premier on-ramp to get in. And if you think about it, it's a really low-level investment of your time. Like, it is a little bit, it feels a little bit like a lottery in that nobody really knows on the personality test kind of what's getting you in there. But you're gonna be polishing your resume anyway if you want a job. Like, 4 hours of your time, half a day to get into this kind of program, I think it's worth it if you have even the tiniest bit of interest. I mean, I feel like the level of investment that your agency will put into you as a PMF is incredibly worth it. It opens so many doors, and you become part of an additional alumni community that will support you for the rest of your career.
I'll just add, depending on where you end up, and we've heard, I'll echo, being a PMF is very prestigious, and you can talk that up throughout the rest of your career, even if you don't stay in the federal government. But to the points that have been made, it can open doors within your agency, and depending on my agency is already, the hierarchy is pretty flat, but in the first month that I started my job, I was in meetings with the Assistant Secretary for Aging, whose boss is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And he left Post-it notes at my desk. So you have doors open for you, just to make that point again.
Yeah, I concur. And I think the program's 2 years, and you really get to first understand whether or not you want to work in the federal government or not. Because after 2 years, the idea, they want you to be able to convert, and they want you to stay in a permanent position to build a federal workforce, but you're able to leverage it if you're more interested in NGO, or if you want to go back to the state. The title of PMF can always come back to benefit you. It's a lot easier for you to be able to start as a PMF and then maybe decide that the federal government is not for you than to kind of go the other way. It's 2 years after graduation. Once the window's closed, you can't be a PMF again. And then just lastly, I think people mentioned, you're able to have, I think, a really controlled ego about the type of work you want to do and about where you want to go, that normally when you're coming right out of graduate school early in your career, that you just don't have the opportunity to go to your supervisor, go to people fairly high up in your department, into your agency, and be like, I'm really interested in shadowing this, or I'm really interested in getting involved in that. You're not going to get that sort of thing as likely if you're not a PMF, and as well as being able to, I would say, explore different parts of the federal government. I would say that if I was early in my career, I don't think it would be likely that I would be able to be 1 year at HHS and be like, I want to spend 6 months at Department of Labor. That's probably not going to be happening. They wouldn't be part of that. But because I'm part of the program, because of the connections that you're able to build within this cohort, within this alumni base, you've really been able to get that wiggle room and be able to really advocate for yourself in ways that usually early in the career, you don't have those opportunities to do.
Just to say one more thing about the rotations that we've all mentioned. So you're required to do at least one rotation of a minimum of 4 months up to 6 months within that 2 years. And that can be, at a different office within your agency. It can be in a totally different department. It can be in a sort of quasi-governmental, like the Pan American Health Organization or the National Academies. And you can also go to the Hill and work for a committee. So I did my rotation at the Senate Special Committee on Aging about 1 week before the impeachment trial, January 2020, wrapped up mid-May 2020. So spent the last half from my apartment. Very interesting time, but that's also not a normal thing, that if you came into federal service kind of any other way, being able to do rotations early in your career is unusual. And to be able to do them on the Hill or these other places, it's really neat.
Well said, all of you. Thank you. I have a couple of questions in the chat. Alex says, thanks y'all for being here. Once accepted to the PMF program, in your experience, were there certain offices that took longer to navigate to gain positions?
Anything that requires a high level of clearance is going to take a lot longer. And in my class here in particular, there was a lot of budget stuff that was kind of up in the air, and State Department did not post their positions until like well into the summer. So I would say anything with like national security is going to be a longer road.
I think also each agency approaches the process differently. So like CDC posts all their positions at the very beginning. State posts things randomly throughout, and it's just one here and there. And then USAID posts all their positions in March. So, and then the hiring process is really different, right? Some of them will require a cover letter, some just a resume. Some of them get back to you within a week, some take a month. So generally, like if you're selected for a position, the hiring process will take longer for higher security. But then honestly, each individual agency approaches it completely differently. So it's really good to kind of network with people at those agencies and kind of learn what the process is. And then some of the PMF coordinators just don't respond. The USAID one only responds to me because I have escalated my concerns so many times with people above her that I think she's afraid of me at this point. But you know, it can be difficult. And so it's definitely important to like reach out to people that know that agency because it's really, really different for each one.
All right, and then Philip asks, when you hire out after the program, are they directing you towards supervisory or non-supervisory roles? It's a good question.
So Tasha and I are the only ones here who have completed the program. So I'll speak for myself, and then Tasha, if you want to jump in. But I was hired in on a 9 to 13 ladder. There's a lot of weird terminology with federal jobs too. So like, just get used to asking people, what do you mean a ladder? What are you talking about? So the GS scale general services, I believe is what that stands for. There's kind of a base pay, and then there's a locality pay component of it. You can Google it. You can look at whatever job, whatever region you're looking for positions to know what the pay would be. And then like people have mentioned within the PMF program, you can expect to go up a GS level. So if you come in as a 9 to an 11, I don't know why they skipped 10. Don't question it. Go up to an 11, and then I graduated out as a 12. But because I'm on a scale to 13, I don't have to apply to a 13. I can be promoted, and I should be in September at my 3rd year anniversary. I'll go up to a 13 automatically. But that's not a supervisory position. So within my agency, you'd have to apply to be a 14, to be a team lead. And then 15s are typically, you know, directors, managers of offices. So I would think in most cases, you're not going to be a supervisor right out the gate.
Yeah. So just to be clear on the latter thing, you know, 9 to 13, you are doing the same job. There are just higher performance expectations as you move up that ladder. And yeah, generally 13 is what you can cap out at as a PMF through that competitive process. I know a handful of STEM people with PhDs who have been able to negotiate 14 ladders, but it's kind of unusual to find a non-supervisory 14 or 15 position normally, and those you would have to apply for. That said, you know, PMF really is intended to kind of find the next leaders of government. And so they are encouraging you to take on leadership in whatever capacity. And many PMFs do go on to continue to serve and even move on to the senior executive service.
Kind of to piggyback off that, there are certain job series that just within that series, you're able to go higher than others. So some people don't really know that when they're kind of first starting out. The CDC has a really, again, robust program, and they explain all of this out of the gate because they really want PMFs. But there's so many different job series that they're like trying to hire for. Speaking from experience with the CDC, we have more of the scientist level jobs, epidemiology, we have program analyst jobs, we have communications jobs, HR jobs, diversity and inclusion jobs. And each series, whichever job series that is, can lend itself to be more trying to prepare you for senior executive leadership, or just within that series, it kind of caps out at where it caps out. That's kind of where you'll have to do your homework beforehand, and to see kind of what your ultimate goals are. You can change job series. It's not the easiest process, but it is doable. However, if you already know what you want to do, I'd say find the right job series for that if your ultimate goal is senior executive leadership.
And the job series, Rochelle, that's the 4-digit code. Like I'm an 0101, which is an aging services program specialist. But when they hired me, it was 0301, I believe, which is more general program specialist. And that's because they hired me off of HUD's cert list, and HUD doesn't have aging services program specialists. So after 1 year in my position in that more general role, they actually did reclassify me into a new job series. So I don't know. Sometimes it just depends on where you end up.
Are there any other questions? Raise your hand or just unmute yourself or put something in the chat. If not, I have a question, so I can move forward with that while you guys are still thinking. It sounds like all of you had different timelines for when you applied, when you moved to Washington, D.C. versus when you actually secured a position. So I'm curious to get your perspective on how important it is to be physically in Washington, D.C. during any part of this process. And whether that's changed since, March 2020.
Well, I just moved to Mississippi last week, and I'm still working for the General Services Administration. So I guess it's probably become a little bit less important. Yeah, I did all of my application process from Austin. All of the interviews were either over the phone or video chat. And then I was in DC for the entirety of being a PMF. I moved out the summer after graduation, but it was really nice because my CFO who was hiring me, he gave me the advice like, this is the only time in your life you're going to get this much time off. So take as much of the summer as you want, like pick your own start date. So that was really nice. I mean, there's something very special about being in DC, and as things reopen, getting to do the leadership development program at Mount Vernon or go to the Eisenhower Executive Building is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say since we're still working remote ever since I am board as a PMF. I think the idea, I think the benefit of being in DC, I do think it has merit in the sense that you're able to kind of interact with a cohort of people that the majority of federal employers are going to be in Washington, D.C. So if you want to be able to interact with some of your fellow PMFs of your year, it's easier to be in Washington, D.C. And I think that kind of as you want to be able to network, which I think is a pretty huge benefit of the program that can't be understated. It's easier in the sense that you understand that, for instance, if you're at the office of the secretary and you're interested in speaking to someone from ACF or ACL, you'll be able to find someone that's in DC because you're both there. But I think that it depends a lot on the agencies, and I think depends a lot on what your career aspirations are. I know a lot in the Forest Service, a lot of them are across the country, and I think for me personally, I want to be in Washington, DC, but there's a number of people, and I think HHS, for instance, has a number of offices that are in Atlanta or Baltimore or Hyattsville, and they have fantastic programs that you're able to still get those experiences. So there's certainly benefits to being in DC, but I think that If you're not, you're still able to reap benefits from it. If you're gonna have to just put a certain level of effort that you might not have had to do if you're in Washington, D.C.
As the resident non-HQ person in DC, so CDC, their HQ is in Atlanta, and that's where I happen to be. I would have to say it's not super important, at least right now, to be in DC. However, I will kind of pass on advice that I've heard from other PMFs that I talked to when I was trying to field where I wanted to go. At least historically, being in DC was really beneficial because you have a greater chance of being with a majority of the PMF cohort. It was a lot easier to go to HQ trainings if your agency is based in DC. It's easier to kind of network. You have greater chances of happy hours with other people. But especially given the changes within the past, I don't know, 18 months, a lot of things are becoming more virtual. So you don't always have to be in person to still have the same kind of networking options available to you. Of course, it's not the same, but you're still able to do that. That said, there's a lot of positions all over the United States. If you don't want to be in DC and you prefer to be in LA, like working for Space Force, or if you prefer to be somewhere else in the country, that is a possibility for you. You don't have to go to DC if you're someone who doesn't want to live there. However, once things start opening up again, you may kind of want to be closer to the headquarters of your agency. Just for training purposes, I think our 2018 fellows can probably speak to it a little bit more, but it's just a lot easier and less money for your agency to kind of put money towards sending you to headquarters if you're not there for trainings. So I think that's kind of a little nugget that I would kind of keep in mind as far as determining where you want to live.
That is a great point that Robin just made in the chat. Also, if you go to DC, you can participate in the LBJ Washington Center events, which are pretty cool. They would have like rooftop events. Rooftop is very nice. Even before you accept a position, if you become a finalist, I think it was helpful for me to be in DC. I knew I wanted to be there anyway, but that meant that I could go meet with someone in a coffee shop to try to network, to see if, even if they didn't have a posting available, if they had the kinds of jobs that I was interested in a particular agency. And like I said, I got hired off a cert list. So my boss literally emailed me, said, I read your resume. I would like to meet with you. And we met at a Starbucks in Silver Spring, close to my apartment. And then she said, come in for an interview or give me a writing sample and 3 references. And then I came in for an interview. So that would have been more difficult if I had been in Austin, obviously. But like Rochelle said, there's no one path. You can make it work.
I also think that a lot of agencies are still in maximum telework and will be that way for quite some time. So depending on the agency, you can live wherever you choose. However, that being said, some agencies are having folks come back into the office. I know state has been having a lot of people come back. And then if you deal with classified material, you will have to be within, I think it's an hour of a facility that has a classified access. So those are some things to consider. So if you're interested in national security, really DC is probably where you want to be in order to access classified information in some of those facilities.
All right, if there aren't any more questions on that note, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. Again, thank you all panelists for being here. Really appreciate you sharing your experience and best practices and tips and tricks. I'm sure that current students who are here are going to want to connect with you in some way. I have access to all your LinkedIn profiles, which I am happy to share. But if you want to send me a separate email afterwards and let me know if it's okay to share your email address, I will also put that together. We're recording this. We'll probably get this posted to Canvas and sent out to all of our incoming students as part of our summer stretch program. And I'd be happy to include your contact info with that. So yeah, I guess that concludes, and have a great day.